Okay, let's take a look at 1800 to 1810. Now we know we kick off the 1800s with a pretty spectacular purchase, and that is the Louisiana Purchase. The Louisiana Purchase is this plot of land that was owned by the French, and so the deal was made with the French to buy this land. If that interests you, the idea of we have to have more land, I don't know, it's very interesting to study. And if you're interested in this, then look more into the Louisiana Purchase. Okay, so we've got a few more people living in America now, 5.3 million. The slave rebellion is very interesting. Remember, the Civil War didn't start until 1861, and here we are in 1800, and we've already begun rebelling. And I think it's interesting to look at this sort of thing, if it interests you, to see how long it takes to get change. And also on here, if you're interested in this particular part of the history and the literature that would go along with that history, at the bottom of this timeline is a link to more details about this part of Americana. So if you wanted to learn into that, there's that also. Now, the Fugitive Slave Acts are a dismal point in our history, but from that came some very interesting literature and some very compelling writings and journal entries, and that was the Fugitive Slave Acts. The first was in 1793, and you can see 7 years later, people are already suing against it, trying to get it to be done away with. And then in 1850, they add more provisions and made it even harsher. So if this interests you, that's something to look into as well. So that happens at the beginning of 1800. Congress, our wonderful Congress, convened for the first time. Some of these political events that are being duplicated today as we speak. John Adams was the president, and he created new judgeships, packed the courts with Federalist appointees to mitigate the effects of the election, and he elected John Marshall as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. You see how the politics were, he was adding those politics in to make sure that he would be reelected. And that's interesting. If that interests you, those papers are very important. The Federalist Papers are interesting to read. I think you would want to have a guide that would help you through the Federalist Papers and point out the exact papers that you would want to study depending on what area interested you. Okay. West Point opens. Woohoo! And West Point Academy, Ulysses S. Robert E. Lee, Ulysses S. Grant, and Edgar Allan Poe were first cadets there. Isn't that interesting? And then we have Lewis and Clark. I think that's such an interesting expedition. I've always wanted to have the luxury of time to really explore the Lewis and Clark expedition. I kind of have that wanderlust, and it would have been something that I would want to have done back in those years. And so, anyway, that might interest you. I'm not sure. Aaron Burr. The musical Hamilton is out, and a great deal of publicity and press around this particular person, Aaron Burr. But it's interesting to study if that interests you. And then in May of 1805, they saw the Pacific Ocean. Can you imagine? I can just imagine. I want to read. They wrote such fabulous journals, Lewis and Clark did. They described things, and it's just yummy. So I would really love to study those papers about the Pacific Ocean. Zebulon Pike explored the Louisiana Territory, and the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts and the staircase group. If I was going to be, you remember I put down some of those things about the arts, about music and the arts and so forth and funding. I might want to bring one of these people back and put them on my team to convince a bunch of donors to give money to that cause. And that's one of the things back from that overview of this particular unit. Okay, so you can see that this is the political context of the first 10 years of the 1800s. And I think it's interesting to see that this is going on. We're exploring strange new lands. We're seeing the Pacific Ocean. All sorts of people are positioning, trying to get power, that human need for power. So over here, let's just scroll over on this timeline. You can access this timeline. The link is below this tutorial. This is the one that interests me. I don't know. Look at all these. And of course, you'll be able to go out and just in Google, just type up literature 1800 to 1810 and you'll find things. But I've always thought Washington Irving had it going on. He wrote The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, you know, with Ichabod Crane, the school teacher who goes out into the countryside, and he comes face to face with the headless hunter, right? The headless horseman, rather. Remember this novel? It's a really good one. It's scary. It scares me to pieces. But here's the thing. If you were interested in Washington Irving and what he was writing and the satirical society that he had created, what is behind this Legend of Sleepy Hollow? What does it say to people about mankind? What happens when you go out at night? You know, what is, I don't know. It's interesting, though, if you're interested in it. Okay, so that takes care of these 10 years. Give it some thought. See if anything from here interests you, and go ahead, click Submit here under this tutorial, and jot down in that text box anything about this 10 years that interests you. Hopefully it won't be nothing, because you never know when you might need something to, you know, like if I was going to do that wilderness program where I want them to fund for these students to go out and have a wilderness experience, who better to invite than Lewis and Clark? So anyway, just think about that. Click the button and add whatever interests you, and we'll move on next to 1810 to 1820. That concludes this first tutorial.